Chapter 37. Generous Gifts to Old Foes. Realizing that a continued siege of Taif would not bring about the desired results, the Prophet ordered his troops to decamp. The Thaqif were unlikely to try to stage a military operation against the Muslims. Even if they did, that would mean abandoning their fortified city, when it would be easier for the Muslims to inflict on them a telling defeat. The Prophet, however, hoped that if the Thaqif were left alone for a while, they might start to reconsider their position. The wiser men might begin to think about Islam in a new light. Moreover, some elements in the Muslim army were probably feeling wary after this long campaign. Besides, some might have been eager to receive their share of the booty the Muslims had gained from the Hawazin. The departure from Taif to Makkah signaled the approach of the division of that booty. The Prophet had sent all the cattle and other property which the Muslim army had gained to Al-Jiranna. Now he was heading there himself to divide the spoils of war among his companions, as is customary in Islam. The Muslims had indeed gained great wealth from the Hawazin. The women and children now traveling with their army as captives numbered 6,000. There were reported to be 24,000 camels and 40,000 sheep in addition to 4,000 ounces of silver. Appeal by the captives. When the Prophet reached Al-Jiranna, he was soon joined there by a delegation from the Hawazin. Many Hawazin people were now Muslims. The delegation said to him, "Messenger of God, we are your people and your own clan. You know the sort of disaster which has befallen us. We appeal to you to show mercy to us. May God bestow His grace on you." Their spokesman, Zuhair ibn Sarad, said to the Prophet, "Messenger of God, those women who have fallen captive to you include some who are your aunts and some who were your wet nurses when you were young. Had we been in such a relationship with the king of Ghassan in Syria or the king of Al-Manadira in Iraq, and had this sort of disaster befallen us at their hands, we would still have hoped that they would show leniency towards us. You, God's messenger, are the best to return kindness." The reference to the Prophet's aunts from the Hawazin is a reference to the fact that as an infant, the Prophet was looked after by Halima, a wet nurse from Sa'd, a clan of the Hawazin. The Prophet asked them which they loved better, their women and children or their wealth. They answered, "Messenger of God, are you giving us a choice between our families and our wealth? Our women and children are certainly dearer to us." The Prophet said to them, "My own share and the share of my clan, the Abdul Muttalib, are yours. When I have finished the congregational prayers, stand up and say, 'We appeal by God's messenger to the Muslims, and we appeal by the Muslims to God's messenger to release our women and children.' When you do that, I will give you what I can, and I will ask others to give you what they can as well." When the Prophet had finished his midday prayers, with all the Muslims praying with him, the delegation from the Hawazin stood up and said what the Prophet had told them to say. The Prophet explained to the Muslims that the Hawazin had repented of their previous attitude and had become Muslims. He also said to the Hawazin people, "My own share and the share of the clan of Abdul Muttalib are yours." The Muhajirin said, "Our shares belong to God's messenger." The Ansar said likewise. Al-Aqra ibn Habis, the chief of the Tamim tribe, said, "As for me and my tribe, we decline." The same attitude was expressed by Uyayna ibn Hisan, the chief of the Fazara tribe, and Al-Abbas ibn Mirdas, the chief of the tribe of Sulaim. People from Sulaim, however, turned him down and said, "Indeed, our shares belong to God's messenger." Al-Abbas ibn Mirdas was unhappy with his people. He said to them, "You have let me down." This created a situation where some women and children from the Hawazin were still in captivity. According to the general rules and traditions of the time, they would have been enslaved. The Prophet did not like that at all. For one thing, he disliked slavery. For another, he was keen that the Hawazin should be an asset to Islam. They should not have any cause for complaint against the Muslims. He therefore announced to the Muslims, "He of you who wants to hold to his right will be given instead of what he has now 6 shares of the first spoils of war we gain." This was rich compensation, and all those who refused to give up their shares in the captive women and children from the Hawazin were happy with the exchange. Thus, all the women and children from the Hawazin were freed and returned to their people. That gesture went a long way to reconcile the Hawazin and encourage them in their new determination to be Muslims. Replacing old hostility. It has already been mentioned that the Battle of Hunain resulted in huge gains of camels, sheep, and silver for the Muslims. All these spoils of war were now at Al-Jirana, awaiting the Prophet's arrival with his Muslim army. Those who were in the Muslim army besieging Taif were looking forward to the time when it would be shared out. The release of the Hawazin captives, however, made many of them, especially among those who belonged to Bedouin tribes or had only recently embraced Islam, fear that the wealth of the Hawazin might yet be returned to them. Some of them came to the Prophet and asked him insistently to divide the spoils of war. The Prophet had certain ideas about the division of the property. One has to remember that only a few weeks earlier, Makkah had fallen to the Muslims. Although many Meccans had adopted Islam, it was not to be expected that 20 years of hostility would be replaced by love and compassion overnight. Hence, he felt that the wealth he had gained at Hunain provided him with a chance to help this process of removing the traces of former hostility. Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, the Meccan chief who had led the Quraysh for several years in its attempts to suppress Islam and had accepted Islam only recently, came to the Prophet when all the silver, more than 4,000 ounces, that was gained at Hunain was put in front of him. Abu Sufyan looked at it and said, "Messenger of God, you have become the richest among the Quraysh." The Prophet smiled. Abu Sufyan continued, "Give me some of this, Messenger of God." The Prophet turned to Bilal, who quite often acted as his treasurer, and said, "Bilal, weigh 40 ounces of silver for Abu Sufyan and give him 100 camels." Abu Sufyan was gratified, but wanted to gain more. He said to the Prophet, "What about my son Yazid?" The Prophet said to Bilal, "Weigh for Yazid 40 ounces of silver and give him 100 camels." Abu Sufyan then said, "And my son Muawiyah, Messenger of God?" The Prophet again told Bilal to weigh 40 ounces of silver for Muawiyah and to give him 100 camels. Abu Sufyan was overwhelmed. He said to the Prophet, "You are indeed very generous. May my parents be sacrificed for your sake. I fought you, and you were the most honorable of foes, and I have made peace with you, and you have proved to be the best of friends. May God reward you with his best blessings." The Prophet also gave of other people 100 camels each. Hakim ibn Hizam, Al-Harith ibn Kilda, Al-Kama ibn Al-Adaha, Al-Ala ibn Haritha, Al-Harith ibn Hisham, Jubair ibn Mutim, Suhail ibn Amr, Huwatib ibn Abdul Uzza, Uyayna ibn Hisan, and Al-Akra ibn Habis. He was also reported to have given Safwan ibn Umayyah 100 camels. Indeed, he gave him 300 camels in 3 successive installments. He looked at him and saw him looking at a piece of land where some cattle and sheep were kept. The Prophet asked him, "Do you like this piece of land, Abu Wahab?" Safwan said, "Yes, indeed." The Prophet said, "It is yours, with all that is in it." Safwan said, "Kings do not make such gifts willingly. No one can give so generously except a prophet. I declare that there is no deity other than God, and that you are God's messenger." The Prophet also gave Al-Abbas ibn Mirdas a number of camels which did not amount to 100. He did not like that. Since he was a gifted poet, Al-Abbas expressed his feelings in a few lines of poetry. The Prophet then increased his gift to make him equal with the others. One notes here that Al-Abbas ibn Mirdas was a Muslim before the conquest of Mecca. This is perhaps the reason for the Prophet giving him less than the others, because those who were given large gifts were recent converts or dignitaries who had not yet become Muslims. Gifts to transform hearts. The word was soon heard all over the place that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was giving large gifts to tribal chiefs. People from every tribe and clan raced to take their share. Everyone wanted something special for himself. Bedouins surrounded the Prophet and said to him, "Messenger of God, divide our booty among us." There were several of them, and they pressed him hard. He moved close to a tree, and part of his robes fell off him. He said to them, "Give me back my robe, you people. By him who holds my soul in his hand, if I had as many cattle as the trees in Tihama, a large area of Arabia, I would have shared it out among you, not begrudging you any of it. You would not have found me miserly or cowardly or a liar." He then took a hair off a camel and held it up between his 2 fingers and said, "Nothing of your booty belongs to me. not even this hair, apart from 1/5 of it. This 1/5 is given back to you. This, as we have seen, was a reference to the divine rule that any spoils of war which are gained by Muslims are divided into 2 sections. 1/5 belongs to the state, and the remainder is shared out among the soldiers. What this division of the spoils of war meant was that those who were yesterday's enemies and those who were absolutely useless in the initial stage of the Battle of Hunain, fleeing in front of the Hawazin, were given the largest shares. The Prophet viewed material wealth as petty. It did not deserve to be given much thought. Yet it was important to gain such people for Islam if Islam was to be established firmly in the rest of Arabia. They must not remain shaky. The Prophet realized that many people are won over to the camp of truth only through material gain. They did not belong to that class of the Muhajirin and the Ansar who believed in the cause of Islam and were always ready to defend it with their lives. Such people needed encouragement and a feeling that they would not lose materially if they were to join the camp of Islam. How else would a man like Abu Sufyan, who until yesterday was a sworn enemy of Islam, be genuinely reconciled to its message and be expected to defend it, if he was not reassured that what he had lost in position he had recovered in wealth? This division of the spoils of war was meant to gain for the cause of Islam people of influence and high position in order to ensure that Islam did not remain confined to Medina or to the elite in Arabia, namely the Muhajirin and the Ansar. It was an exercise in winning hearts. Safwan ibn Umayyah remarked later on, God's messenger was the most hateful person to me, but he continued to give me the spoils of the Battle of Hunain until he was dearer to me than any creature on the face of the earth. If giving such gifts meant such a transformation of feelings and passions, then it was indeed done for a good purpose. A person like Safwan ibn Umayyah, with his influence among his people, was an important gain for Islam. To buy his genuine loyalty was certainly cheap at the price. Yet the purpose behind such division was not immediately apparent to most people, despite the fact that God has made those whose hearts to be won over one of the 8 groups to whom zakat can be given. Some people made very offensive remarks about this distribution of the spoils of war. One person said, "This is a division devoid of justice. It was not done for the sake of God." The Prophet was very angry when he was told of this. He said, "Who is fair if God and His Messenger are not? May God have mercy on Moses. Worse abuse was showered on him, and he tolerated it patiently." The remainder of the spoils of war was divided among his soldiers. A fighter on foot received 4 camels and 40 sheep. A horseman received 3 times as much, and this was customary in sharing our spoils of war. Yet the large gifts made to yesterday's foes caused more friction. It should be remembered that those gifts were made in public. There were no secret deals. It was therefore inevitable that they would give rise to different reactions from different people. What was obvious was that no one among the Ansar, be he a chief or an ordinary member of his clan, was given any special gift. Such an omission could not have been the result of forgetfulness on the part of the Prophet. The Ansari chiefs were very close to him. Hence, it was not surprising that some of them should feel aggrieved. There were even whispers of dissatisfaction among them. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, a young companion of the Prophet who belonged to the Ansar, reports, "When God's messenger gave away those generous gifts to people in the Quraysh and in other Arabian tribes, while no such gifts were given to anyone from the Ansar felt hard done by. Remarks of dissatisfaction were frequently uttered. Some of them said, 'Indeed, God's messenger has met his people,' meaning that he had forgotten his loyal supporters." Dissatisfied supporters. Sa'd ibn Ubadah, the chief of the Ansar, went to the Prophet and said to him, "Messenger of God, these clans of the Ansar have taken your action to heart." The Prophet asked, "What action?" Sa'd said, "The way you have distributed those spoils of war among your own people and the other Arabian tribes. No such gifts were made to any person among the Ansar." The Prophet wanted to gauge those feelings, so he put this direct question to Sa'd. "What is your own stand?" Sa'd answered, "I am only one of my people." The Prophet therefore told him to ask all his people to assemble in a nearby place and let him know when they had assembled. When all of them were gathered, Sa'd came to the Prophet and said, "Messenger of God, the Ansar have assembled where you have instructed me to gather them for you." The Prophet went out to them and addressed them, starting by praising God and glorifying Him as He should be glorified. He then said to them, "People of the Ansar, what is this which has been reported to me that you have been saying? And what are you aggrieved about? Did I not come to you when you were astray and God has guided you to the right path? Did I not find you poor and God has given you of His riches? Did I not come to you when you were at war and God has united your hearts?" They answered, "Indeed, we have been graced with great bounties by God and His messenger." The Prophet then asked them, "Why do you not answer me, people of the Ansar?" They said, "How shall we answer you, messenger of God? We are greatly indebted to God and to His messenger." The Prophet said to them, "You can, if you wish, say what is true and what people will believe. You came to us when people denied your message, and we have accepted it. You were rejected, without support and shouldering a heavy burden when you came to us, and we have given you welcome and support, and have also lightened your burden. People of the Ansar, are you aggrieved at a trifle of this world which I have given out to certain people in order to win their hearts over to Islam and left you to rely on your faith? Are you not satisfied, people of the Ansar, that other people should go to their quarters with sheep and camels, while you go back to your own quarters with God's messenger? By Him who holds Muhammad's soul in His hand, peace be upon him, had it not been for my emigration, I would have been one of the Ansar. If all people went one way, and the Ansar went another way, I would take the way of the Ansar. My Lord, shower your mercy on the Ansar, and the Ansar's children, and the children of their children." As they heard the Prophet's words, tears sprang to their eyes. They were so touched that their beards were wet with tears. They said, "We are satisfied with God's messenger as our share." This is yet another lesson learnt from the Prophet. It shows how remarkable the difference is between Islam as a message and any other theory or philosophy. Had the Ansar been the supporters or advocates of any creed or philosophy, and had they sacrificed for it what they had willingly sacrificed for Islam, they might have been in revolt against the Prophet for denying them what would have seemed to all people to be their rightful reward. After all, they were the people who had given willingly, time after time, all the sacrifice they were called upon to give in order to achieve what had finally been achieved with the conquest of Mecca and the victory at Hunain. Yet, at that very moment of triumph, they were denied the fruits of their efforts, or so it might have seemed to anyone who took a narrow view of things. Yet the Ansar were denied nothing. At no time was material reward a part of the bargain which they made with the Prophet when they pledged their support to him at Aqaba some 9 or 10 years earlier. At that time they asked the Prophet what reward they were to expect for giving him all the support he needed, even if it meant fighting against the whole world. His answer was, heaven. He did not promise them anything in this world, hence they were not to expect anything. Some peoples may nevertheless argue that although the Ansar did not expect anything, now that riches were at the Prophet's disposal, a token of appreciation might not have gone amiss. That again is a narrow view of the nature of the role of the advocates of Islam. They are always called on to show whatever effort they exert in support of Islam. Their pure motive is to win God's pleasure. They look forward to no other gain. A mere trifle. It is worth reflecting a little on the Prophet's description of those large gifts he made to those dignitaries of the Quraysh and other Arabian tribes. A camel represented wealth to the Arabs at that time. Compared with today, a camel was much more valuable than a luxury motor car. One may spend a great deal of money on car maintenance, while a camel can eat any dry plants which cost nothing to grow. Moreover, the female camel produces milk, which is highly nourishing. She bears offspring, and she can be slaughtered for food. 100 camels to each of those Arab chiefs was then very great wealth. Yet it was such great wealth which the Prophet described as a trifle of this world. This description fits perfectly with the Islamic view of the role of the advocates of Islam, their motives and ambitions. They seek only the pleasure of God. This cannot be combined with any other motive. Hence, they are called on to give their all in this life while expecting nothing. Their reward comes in the hereafter. This view has been expressed very vividly by the Prophet in connection with one individual. Al-Bukhari relates, on the authority of Amr ibn Taghlib, the Prophet made large gifts to some people while denying others. Some of them felt aggrieved. He said, I give out gifts to certain people because I fear that they may be shaken. Others I trust to what God has placed in their hearts of goodness and riches. Among the latter is Amr ibn Taghlib. Amr comments, I would not exchange the Prophet's statement for the world. The final word in this connection is that the Prophet's action was a lesson for all advocates of Islam in all generations. They must expect no reward in this life. When the Prophet had finished the business of sharing out the spoils of war, he entered into the state of consecration in order to offer an umrah. There was soon something else to satisfy the Ansar. When the Prophet had done his umrah and no more trouble lay ahead, the Ansar whispered to one another, now that God has given his messenger his own land and his own city, do you think that he will settle here? At that moment, the Prophet was praying to God at the top of the hill of Al-Safa. When he had finished his prayers, he asked the Ansar what they had said. At first, they would not tell him. When he insisted, they expressed their fears that he might wish to settle in Makkah. He answered, Far be it from me. My life is with you, and my death will be among you. They were very happy with this reassurance. This showed that the ties between the Muhajirin and Medina were too strong and profound to be outweighed by nostalgic memories of the dearest of homelands. Since the people of Makkah had converted only recently to Islam, the Prophet appointed his companion, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, one of the Ansar, to teach them the Quran and the Sunnah. He also appointed Attab ibn Usaid as governor of Makkah. Attab was a young man, only 20 years old, but he had already shown qualities of leadership. He was courageous, endowed with native intelligence, and he did not view his position as a means to gain any riches. The Prophet had fixed his salary at a mere 1 dirham per day. Attab, however, was very happy with it. He said to the people, He who feels hungry when he is given 1 dirham, let him remain hungry forever. The Prophet has given me 1 dirham per day, which means that I need nothing from anyone else. The Prophet then went back to Medina with the Muhajirin and the Ansar.